Thank you.
Hey, everybody. So good to see you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the Elwha for sharing the beautiful lands and waters here with us. I need to bottle up some of this energy here today because I am going to speak with Congress this coming week in DC. So let me just soak this up for a minute because we have a strong message to send, don't we? Yes. We want to tell them that the future of our communities matters more than short-term profits, right? Is that right? And we want to tell them that it's not just our environment that's at risk, but also that we're taking huge hits to our economy and our rural populations, and that vulnerable populations are most at risk. So carry that message with me, please. We know it needs to be heard. So I spent about a year and a half working with many of you, about 200 people in our regional communities, wrote a climate change preparedness plan for the North Olympic Peninsula. And I encourage you to look it up online if you haven't seen it already. And I'm going to share today with you some of what we found. First, I'd say we learned that the peninsula here, our residents are deeply connected to the environment, whether it's transportation or jobs or recreation, drinking water, electricity. We're dependent on all these tenuous systems in a very, very intimate and fragile way. Second, we learned about the research, science, real science, that tells us that change is already happening and more of what we can expect in the future. And that's what I want to talk with you about today, okay, is a little bit about this concept of climate change. What does it actually mean? What does the research actually tell us? So when we think about climate change, sea level rise comes to mind, obviously, because of where we live, right? And we anticipate certainly certain locations to be inundated. But the more immediate threat, and what we're seeing already, is that when you take sea level rise in any amount and you pair it with storm surge or king tides, or maybe all three of those things, that you get much greater impacts. And we're already seeing things like inundation in utility boxes in downtown Port Townsend. We're seeing our ports, where there are millions of dollars of capital infrastructure, not knowing how they're going to maintain those, and governments not knowing how on earth, especially with the federal administration, we're going to be able to pay to maintain that infrastructure. These are very real questions right now. Let's talk about drought, right? Most of the report we wrote was completed in 2015. We went into the year with 0% snowpack in many places, record low rainfall, high temperatures, and the data tells us that we can just expect more and more of that over time. We're going to get higher precipitation rates in the winter, with less of that falling as snow, more as winter. We'll get back to that. Less precipitation in the summer. And that's concerning for many of us who rely on snowpack for our drinking water, but also when you think about the food we eat, the irrigation we need for agriculture, huge, huge impacts. The forests, which are critical to our economy and why so many of us choose to live here, face incredible stresses from drought too. They're susceptible to pest infestations and forest fire, like we saw in the rainforest. And how about salmon? Low stream flows mean higher water temperatures, difficult for young salmon to survive in that, and then also make it harder for adult salmon to return to spawning grounds. During our project, we were out with the macaw, and an elder, a fisherman, told us, our way of life has depended on knowing when the salmon return, on knowing when berries ripen. And we just don't know these things anymore. And that was really powerful for me to hear. The flip side of drought, of course, is a winter like we've had this year, right? Increased rainfall in the winter. We can expect to see more of that. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like unstable slopes. It looks like mudslides. It looks like closed roads. And again, we have a taxing structure that doesn't allow your jurisdictions to really be able to handle those very well. Huge impacts, environment and economy. And then there's ocean acidification. We live in one of the finest regions in the world for growing shellfish. As the oceans are absorbing more and more excess carbon dioxide, the shells are becoming brittle and crumbling long before shellfish can mature. That same process is happening with the very base of the food chain, right? So we're going to see incredible impacts to salmon all the way up the food chain, up to our beloved orcas, right? So I want to tell you one last thing that I learned during the year and a half I worked on climate change pretty intensively. And that is that I needed to be more engaged, that government needed to be accountable for both mitigating climate change, but also preparing for and adapting to climate change. So I decided to run for office, and luckily I won. Thank you. So I want to ask all of you to think about how you can engage further, including thinking about running for office, please, 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 so that you can deepen your commitment and activism as well. Thank you all. I'll be carrying this with me to Congress.